January to try to assess how dangerous the global situation is. And 85 seconds to midnight is the closest to midnight, to the end of the world, that the bulletin has ever set this iconic clock. And we need to pay attention to that, because one of the big problems in the world today is that although we are literally at the brink of nuclear war, we're not paying attention to this problem the way that we need to.
Right. I understand that. That makes perfect sense. Now, Dr. Helfand, you spent decades studying nuclear weapons, not only from a policy perspective, but also from a public health perspective as a physician. What are the human consequences mis people often underestimate when we talk about nuclear war?
Yeah, that's a great question, Clay. I think a lot of people, when they think about nuclear war, they think of images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And these are very powerful images, and they're very powerful warnings to us about what nuclear weapons can do. But what we really need to understand is that Hiroshima and Nagasaki don't begin to prepare us for what's going to happen if nuclear weapons are used again today. The Hiroshima bomb had the force of 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of nuclear explosive. Most of the weapons today in the US and Russian arsenal are between 100 and 800 kilotons.
Wow.
That is, they're 6 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. And if the US and Russia get into a war, it's not going to be one bomb on one city. A big target city like New York or Washington or Chicago or Dallas, they're going to get hit with anywhere from 10 to 15, maybe more nuclear warheads, each of which 6 to 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. And it's really almost impossible for us to visualize what that looks like. I often use a model of one very large explosion, a 20 megaton bomb, 20 million tons of TNT. The explosive force in this model is greater than all but the largest targets like New York would be expected to receive. But the destruction is actually an underestimate, because you do cause more damage if you use a bunch of smaller bombs and spread them out over the area you're trying to destroy. But I think this model helps people understand how different a nuclear war would be today. Within a thousandth of a second of the detonation of that bomb, a fireball would form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, 4 miles across. Within that entire area, everything would be vaporized. To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the explosion would generate winds greater than 600 miles per hour. Mechanical forces of that magnitude destroy anything that we can build. To a distance of 6 miles in every direction, the heat would be so intense that automobiles would melt. And to a distance of 16 miles in every direction, the heat would still be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Paper, wood, cloth, gasoline, heating oil, it would all ignite, and you'd get hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour would coalesce into a firestorm 32 miles across, 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperature would rise to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of New York or Moscow or Beijing, they're all about the same size. You're talking about 10 to 15, maybe 18 million people dead in a half an hour. And if the US and Russia go to war, or US and China go to war, that kind of destruction is going to take place at every major city in the countries that fight the war. All told, maybe 200 million, maybe 300 million people dead on the first afternoon.
Wow.
So that's what we need to understand. And I should say also, that just describes the effects in the countries which fight the war. A war of this magnitude would be a disaster for the entire planet, because all the smoke from all these fires, go up into the upper atmosphere, block out the sun, and drop temperatures, in the case of the US-Russia war, across the planet, an average of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. In the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures would drop 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's colder than it's been at any time on this planet since the last ice age, 18,000 years ago. And under those conditions, most of the food production on the planet would stop. And according to a study that was published in the journal Nature in the summer of 2022, in the first 2 years, 3/4 of the human race, 6 billion people, would starve to death. Even a smaller war between India and Pakistan would cause enough climate disruption to trigger a famine that would kill 2 billion people worldwide in the first 2 years, including 130 million people here in the United States. So that's what we need to understand. This is the danger that we're running every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist.
Wow. That's definitely alarming news. Well, just given recent headlines about tensions in the Middle East, doctor, and nuclear proliferation, they have brought about these issues back into focus. From your perspective, how unstable is the global nuclear situation today compared to previous decades? If you could expound upon that a little more.
Yeah, I think the situation today, as the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has indicated, is the most dangerous it's ever been. We started getting warnings about this back in 2018 from former Defense Secretary William Perry. He said then that the danger of nuclear war was greater than it had been during the Cold War, the greatest it had ever been. And he was talking about the US-Russia situation. This was 4 years before the second Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has only made that situation more dangerous. But there's also the possibility of war between the United States and China, between India and Pakistan, on the Korean Peninsula. And all of these situations are extremely volatile, very unstable. And this is a situation which we just cannot afford to ignore as we currently are to a significant degree.
Wow. And now I have a policy question here to go along with that. So with the expiration of the New START Treaty, we are entering a moment where the limits on nuclear arsenals are becoming less clear. What risk does that create for the global system, if you can answer from that angle?
Yeah, well, I think, New START was the last treaty that put any restrictions on the size of the US and Russian arsenals. And now that that treaty has expired, the United States and Russia can develop as many warheads as they want to. And there are people here in the United States, for example, that are pushing very hard for the United States to expand its nuclear arsenal, saying we have to have as many weapons as Russia and China combined. So if we decide to do that, Russia will say, well, US has more weapons than we do now. We need to expand our arsenal. And then we'll need to expand ours further. And you'll just get into this incredible spiral. We've done this once before. In the 1980s, we ended up with the United States 30,000 nuclear warheads at a time when we knew perfectly well would destroy the Soviet Union. We had 30,000 of them. And it's the sort of game theory logic that is allowed to dictate what our nuclear posture is going to be that leads to this incredibly bizarre, really insane result. What we need to do is refocus the conversation about nuclear policy on the actual consequences. What is going to happen if these weapons are used? And when we do that, we realize that, 250 warheads today, that's how many would be used in a war between India and Pakistan, can destroy human civilization. Then it becomes pretty clear that there's no rationale for further expanding these arsenals. In fact, we need to get rid of them as quickly as we can. But with New START gone, that's the direction that I fear we'll go in. This could trigger a really unregulated new nuclear arms race between the United States, Russia, China, and other countries may get into it as well.
Yes. So you're speaking at South by Southwest EDU about media that matters, nuclear weapons, basically, and the next generation. So why do you think, as it relates to South by Southwest EDU, is it important for younger generations to understand understand and engage with these issues now?
Well, Clay, one of the real problems that we face today is that there's a whole generation, actually a couple of generations of young people who have never been taught about this. And when you talk to smart, generally well-educated young people, they are often profoundly ignorant about this particular issue because they've never been taught. What WGBH, the PBS station in Boston, Massachusetts, has done is to create a wonderful collection of materials that can be used by high school and even junior high school teachers. They're age appropriate, and they will let teachers have the resources they need to begin to teach young people what they need to know about nuclear war. And we're going to be talking at South by Southwest EDU about this collection of materials. People from WGBH will be presenting them, and I think this is an enormously valuable resource, which I hope will be brought well to the attention of educators all around the country, because it's something they should be using.
And that's definitely good to hear in that regard. Now, as far as solutions for people who feel overwhelmed by the scale of this problem or these problems, these sets of problems, what practical steps can policymakers, institutions, or even just general citizens take to move us towards a more safer planet without nuclear weapons?
Well, the Back from the Brink campaign, which I work with, is advocating for the United States to change its fundamental nuclear policy, to recognize that nuclear weapons don't make us safe, that they are the greatest threat to our safety, and that our security actually demands that we work for a world free of these weapons. We specifically call on the United States to enter now into negotiations with the other 8 countries which have nuclear weapons to
Hmm.
try to work out an agreement to eliminate these weapons in a verifiable, enforceable process with a specific timetable to be negotiated for dismantling the individual warheads. And I would encourage people who are interested in getting involved to join that campaign. Our website is preventnuclearwar.org. We also have a student organization that we're working very closely with called Students for Nuclear Disarmament, which has activity on 22 campuses around the country and is rapidly expanding. I think it's important for people to understand that no one of us is going to solve this problem alone, but that each one of us needs to do our part. In the 1980s, we were able to build an enormous movement in this country, literally millions of people worried about nuclear war, determined to do something about it. And their activity paid off. In 1983, we almost went to war with the Soviet Union twice. Less than 2 years later, the United States and the Soviet Union sat down together and said nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. And the Cold War arms race ended. And it was a profound change in the nuclear policy of both the United States and the Soviet Union. And it was brought about by the mass demand of people here in the United States, in Europe, in the Soviet Union, that nuclear policy be changed. And we need to do that again today.
That's definitely very important, very relevant to hear. Now, Doctor, you've received the Gandhi King Ikeda, if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, Community Builders Award from Morehouse College's MLK International Chapel. How do the traditions of leaders like King and Gandhi influence the modern movement for nuclear disarmament?
Well, specifically, Martin Luther King was a very strong advocate of nuclear abolition, and his wife, Coretta Scott King, especially after Martin Luther King was assassinated, played a very important role in the anti-nuclear movement of the 70s and 80s.
Wow.
It flows directly from the teaching of nonviolence. Nuclear war is the ultimate form of violence.
Yeah.
And, I was deeply, deeply honored to receive this award from Morehouse, and grateful to them for using that award to draw attention to this urgent need to eliminate nuclear weapons, something which Martin Luther King worked for in his lifetime. Gandhi died before the nuclear weapons era really got started. It was shortly after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But his teaching on nonviolence, just had a profound impact on the civil rights movement here in the United States and on the global movement to seek nonviolent solutions to the disputes that arise between nations.
Well, that's definitely good. Now, I want to close with a hope and vision question. Now, despite the risks that we're facing, you've continued this work for decades. What gives you hope that meaningful progress toward nuclear disarmament is still possible?
I think the main thing that gives me hope is the historical record. In the 1980s, we were on the brink of nuclear war then too, and we were able to turn that around and end the Cold War arms race. We didn't get rid of the nuclear weapons altogether, but we ended the Cold War arms race. And I think if it had not been for that movement, there probably would have been a nuclear war in the 80s, and we wouldn't be here today. So we've done this once already. I don't think there's a guarantee that we're going to be successful, but I don't think there's any reason to assume that we won't be because we've been able to do this once before. And I think, as I said, no one of us is going to solve this problem alone. But if each of us does that part of the job, which is ours to do, I think we can build that kind of movement again. And I think the thing that above all gives me hope is that we're telling the truth. What we're talking about is a message that resonates with people because when they get the information, they understand this really is the danger that faces us all. And nobody wants to see this happen. So I believe that if we are able to reach out and educate people, to let them know about the extent of the danger they face, that they will take action. And, every one of us wants to do something good with our life. We want our lives to matter. Those of us living today have been given the opportunity to save the world. It doesn't get any better than that. No one can ever do anything better with his or her life. And I think when people understand that, they're going to take action and we're going to be successful. We're going to save the world.
I hear that. Well, Dr. Ira Helfand, thank you for joining us here today and for the decades of work that you've done to bring attention to these critical issues. So thank you for everything you're doing. And let's keep on. And I will do my best I can to spread this word and these efforts that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for that, Clay. It's really important that people like you who are able to reach a big audience are talking about this issue.
Definitely. I'll do the best I can. But thank you again for your time. And you enjoy the rest of your day, sir.
You too. Thank you.